Meeting. We'll have a roll call.
Yes, sir. President Abshire,
Here.
Mr. Anderpont,
Here.
Mr. Barris,
Here.
Mr. Brame,
Here.
Mr. Landry,
Here.
Vice Chairman Marcantel,
Here.
and Chairman Barty.
Here.
Everyone's present.
Thank you, Ms. Kathy.
You're welcome.
Item number 3, administrative presentation of the parish's proposed fiscal year 2022 budget by Mr. Beam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We are pleased tonight to present to you our proposed budget for your consideration and the full jury over the next several weeks. And you should have in front of you, each of you have a copy of the document. I will say that later this evening, the full document, every page, will be on the parish's website and other online resources for the public to start viewing. So want to make sure everybody understands that. There's no action tonight. This is a receipt of it, and of course there'll be plenty of time for any public input. But as we do each year, we cover this in the form of a PowerPoint presentation. It's probably about 30 minutes. Certainly take any questions or comments you have tonight, but there will be plenty of time for input, as I mentioned. I would like to say before we get into the detail, as always, this document takes months of work by many people. Obviously, the finance department is the primary one. They work very hard at this, going way back to August, actually. All the departments do their part, so it's a thorough document, and it's overseen by Ms. Tammy Buffkin, your Director of Finance, and of course, later in the regular meeting, we're going to recognize her because this is her last budget. She's retiring literally today. Technically, maybe not, but I can't pass without, not just this year, but for your whole tenure. Tammy, you've been excellent. I think you know this, but for those who may be watching and don't know, your finance division has been run excellently for many years with Tammy and her predecessor, Jerry Milner, who Tammy worked under for many years. So great job with that, and we'll go ahead and get into it, but know all the work that went into this. The one thing I want to say on the cover slide at the bottom, it's important. We want to remind everybody you have an approved mission, a vision, and core values as an organization, and the ones you have are at the bottom there. Vision, collaboration, dependability, financial stewardship. I think you'll see through the whole presentation, purposely, we touch on these, so this budget document is a very important one that you have to approve, and it takes into consideration all of those things, and that's a part of our culture, and it's an important one, and we'll touch on a few of these as we go through. So at this point, I'll get us started, give a quick outline. This will look familiar to you. I like this format. Break it down into 3 main sections. Start off with what is the economic environment here in the parish and the region, because that determines so many things that affect the police jury organization, primarily revenues. Economies, when they're good and revenues are good, it helps with the tax base. Obviously, it can go down as well. So knowing what it's like now and what we think it's going to be looking ahead is important. That sets context. And then we'll get into the numbers for 2022, what we're proposing, and then at the end, sort of take a look forward, get off the numbers part, a little more of what is the environment we're in. So what is our economic situation here? Well, there's still question marks. We need to be very clear. We understand, as you do, as elected officials, we are still deep into a hurricane recovery phase. And I'd even say COVID recovery. We think and very hopeful that this pandemic will play out. We're going to have COVID with us a long time, but the day when it's not a pandemic is what we're hoping for. However, there's still so much left to do. But there's probably a whole lot more that's been done that's hidden from the fact of still the homes, the businesses, public buildings, and it's discouraging, but I want to tell you there's a lot of good news that maybe isn't so evident that helps us in our economic situation. The petrochemical sector has remained stable throughout. They, like everybody else, got hit hard from the storms. They got affected by COVID. but they've been strong. They were up and running very quickly after Hurricanes Laura and Delta. And for example, your sales taxes, you have two, they're levied in unincorporated areas where most of industry is. So a good chunk of your sales tax revenue is dependent on the petrochemical sector. And I'm glad to see that's not only remained stable, it's pretty strong. The gaming sector has also rebounded. Got hit hard in 2020, early 21, and we're going to go into a little more detail on these later. But it's starting to rebound, and it's only about 3% of your revenues, but it's a key revenue source, so we want to touch on it. Unfortunately, I think the hardest hit economic sector is small business, and that's hard because a lot of those are local folks. Hard to get labor, hard to keep customers when you can't do stuff because of the pandemic, et cetera. Give you an example, if you take our occupational license numbers, which is somewhat of an indicator, look at 2019, which was pre-pandemic, pre-hurricanes, compare it to now, we're down about 30% in those renewals. City of Lake Charles, it's even higher. So we really are hopeful, and we need to make sure we are paying attention to the small business sector and helping them get back to where they need to be. The last bullet is just to say the sales tax revenues and property tax revenues have been positive this year. At this time last year, you may remember, we put in your budget this year a 25% decrease in both, I think both of those sources, Tammy, if I'm not mistaken. We haven't seen that decrease. It's actually been as much or even a little more, and that is extremely satisfying. So there's a lot of good news, but we're still not quite out of the woods with this recovery. Just to give you an indicator, this is still looking at where we've been. This is non-farm employment, which is your job counts. Did it monthly, the little little square, yellow squares represent the month's numbers. Go back to 2018. That's the tail end, if you will, of the big industrial boom. Very expected drop off in 2018, 2019. These projects were finished, a lot of construction jobs, switched to permanent jobs. But take a look at 2020, and of course, everybody in the country saw this. COVID started it. The difference, a lot of those folks after the COVID worst part start going up, we get whacked with 2 hurricanes, a winter storm, a flood, and so you see a bigger downward trend all the way through late 2020. But look what happens in the last few months of 2020 and all of this year. It's going up. These are the jobs counts. This is the Lake Charles MSA, which counts Calcasieu and Cameron parishes. Most of that, of course, is in Calcasieu. So that, to me, is a very good indicator of where we've been and where we're headed. Just a couple of more slides on the economic part. As we look to 2022 and beyond, what variables might affect the economy the most? One, mentioned it, impact of COVID. I think the small business sector can rebound a lot better if we can get rid of this nasty pandemic, and we're almost there. Second, Federal Recovery Fund expenditures. This is no small thing. We'll cover this in a later slide. That will be a large amount of money injected into our area for different things, and it's going to take more than a year, but that is a positive. The big one is at the bottom, and it could go either way, but our LNG projects that are on the table for decisions, final decisions, what they call FID, can make a big difference. The one that's most known, that's probably, we're very optimistic that it could happen, would be down in South Corliss area, the Driftwood LNG project by Tellurian. They have told us, and I think I saw several of you when we visited with their leadership team that came over from Houston during the LNG summit. I know they told all of us they hope to have a decision for that in January. And I'm probably going to get this off a bit, but that is in excess of $10 billion and maybe higher. The other ones at Lake Charles LNG, there's some in Cameron Parish. Those could happen too. So that could be a really big boost, but if they, for whatever reason, don't do it, of course, it hurts. But that's going to affect us. I think this is the last slide on the economy. So this is the annual report Dr. Lawrence Scott gives. He's pretty much the preeminent economic forecaster for Louisiana. He goes around to the metro areas every year. He came to Lake Charles recently. So this is his forecast. You can see the trend. This is the job trends again, kind of like my previous slide. The purpose of showing this slide is what he sees in 2022 and 2023. Looks very good. And if that happens, it's great. And so we hope it is. He thinks it is, but this is important. This forecast, which would take us back to, pre-COVID levels almost, depends on at least one, maybe two of those LNGs getting the green light over the next couple of years. If that doesn't happen, these can go down. It's just a forecast, but when he is predicting that kind of thing, it's actually very good compared to other areas of the state if those things happen. Okay, let's switch to the actual budget. I'll just make a few comments before we get into the details. I always like reminding the jurors and the public the budget is balanced as always. We have the monies to pay for what's in the budget, and it's going to be the case every year. Know that disaster recovery, like this year, that spending is a significant component in this one as well. We still have a very healthy capital budget at $130 million. That's made up of roads, bridges, drainage, building facilities, some sewer, other things. Operational spending is increasing, and we will go into that, but I think you'll see that it's for very good reasons on things that y'all hear from the public a lot on. Real quickly, I'll go over the overall comparison for the whole budget, then break it down by revenues and the expenditure categories, the big ones anyway. Okay, this is the big picture slide. So if you look at the left column, or left bar, stack bar, that's this year's budget, 2021. That's $397.9 million. Keep in mind, both of these years include the disaster part. Normally your budget's more in the $250 million range. This will be with us for a while. The color codes, you can see what categories make that up, and then go to the right, the 2022 budget we are proposing is $395.1 million, which is basically a flat budget. Slightly down, about $2.8 million, but in essence, it's the categories in the budget, what I want to focus on. Some up, some down, but the overall budget is basically the same as this year. These numbers represent what was on the previous graph in the bar chart form. I'll let you digest that, get you some more detail. If you go to the bottom of both years, those totals match. You'll see it's down 2.8 million, which is 0.7%. So the budget's going down less than 1%. So again, in essence, flat. You'll see some of the categories there. Operations up 12%. Major grants are up a lot, and it's mainly a couple of grants. Disaster recovery, I don't want to fool you, it's going down a lot. That's simply because we over budgeted what we thought we'd spend this year on things like building repairs. It's kind of hard to estimate some of this. And it's just, as y'all know from your own experiences, getting it done is extremely frustrating because of shortages of labor, material, contractors, the whole thing. That's the overall big picture. Before I go into revenues on the overall budget, now again, I'm going to cover these categories. Any questions, please raise your hand, stop me anytime. But otherwise, I'll go ahead and start breaking this down a little. Let's start with where the money comes from that you use to provide services to the public. This is a slide I use every year. It's a simple pie chart. So let's talk about some of the big categories. And Tom, if I know you're listening, if you want while I'm talking, if you want to follow with the mouse, you can see the biggest category is actually at the top left, thank you, disaster recovery. That's unusual. It's almost 30%. And we'll get into what makes that up. But the other big categories, you'll see ad valorem taxes, bottom right, kind of the green, which is property taxes. Your sales tax is a little ahead of that in the blue, make up 15%. Go down to the bottom left, prior year fund balance, That's sort of equivalent to taking out of your savings account and putting it into your checking account, but it's because we've been putting money away primarily for capital projects. So this is not a bad thing. We're not squeezing the savings to pay the electric bill. We're putting money toward things we need to build for the future. So this is a very sound, diversified, revenue-sourced budget. You've got smaller categories. I'll certainly try to answer any questions, or Tammy can, but those are your main revenue sources. And let's cover a few of the biggies. As I mentioned earlier, you have a 1 cent sales tax and a 1.5 cent sales tax. We just show the 1 cent because the trends for both are the same, and that's why we show this. Remember, the 1 cent is all unincorporated areas. The 1.5 is all unincorporated except Ward 1, which is Moss Bluff Gillis. So take a look at the trends here. I kept the 2013 forward years because you can see basically the beginning of the boom, if you will, in our parish. Track it going through 2017 when it peaked, a natural falling off of that when some of those construction projects ended. In 2018, a very strong year, even 2019, still higher than, 7 years earlier. And then 2020 was a down year for COVID and hurricanes here in the parish. But look at 2021. This year, by the year end, and we're almost there, so we feel pretty confident in this forecast for year end. It's up. This is the one where we thought it'd go down 25%. Pleasantly surprised. It showed, I think, the strength of some of your economic sectors, and we don't mind being wrong in those forecasts. What we are proposing in next year's budget is a continuation of what we're seeing this year in results, meaning basically the same amount as what we see in 2021. So hard to know in this recovery. You're still seeing what they call that recovery bump from people rebuilding, repairing homes, businesses, government buildings. We don't count on that being strong forever, but it has been that's probably been the big reason why we didn't see the decline. So much money has to be spent to recover. So keeping it on an even keel, looking ahead. Yes, sir?
So with this projection of 2022, is that taking into consideration these LNG plants, or is that without it?
No, sir, because even if, let's say Driftwood announced in January that they are going to build the thing, I think the first year is a lot of, not road prep, but land prep. You're not going to hit the big dollars, maybe late in the year, but we don't project any revenues from that facility in this budget. Is that correct?
Okay, thanks.
That's a good question. We're going to have an issue like that when we get to gaming, and I'll explain later. Any other questions on the sales taxes? Let's take a look at your property taxes. This graph shows you the property tax valuations. This is important. This isn't the tax revenue, because if you look at the vertical axis, that's in billions. We do not get 2.5 billion in taxes. Think of every residential, commercial, and industrial property in the whole parish. The tax assessor, Wendy Aguilard, puts a value on each of those. You add them all up, and that's the tax base you always hear about. That's what this is. And look what it's done. It's a steady increase even through the disasters. I say this a lot, but the property tax is the turtle to the sales tax's hair. You want a hedge against sales tax volatility. This is it. Property taxes are, you're not going to see these big increases usually, but you don't see big up and downs, and that's a very good thing. With that in mind, from the tax assessor again, the 2.7% increase next year in the tax base is what we utilize in looking at our revenue. So that's a positive, as well as sales taxes. And that's not an unusual increase. As you can see, it's pretty even keel. Let's talk about gaming. Again, only 3% of your revenue, but very useful in things for non-recurring costs that you use in many different areas. Go back to 2016, you can see a very even trend line. These numbers are not just what the police jury gets in gaming revenue. It's all the public entities in the parish, all the cities, for example. And so it's been around 33, 32 million going from 2016, 2019, and then the predictable reduction in 2020 when COVID shut them down for a while. Hurricanes damaged them too for a while. The good news is, especially with LeBears and Golden Nugget and Delta Downs, recovering very well in the second half of 2021, and we project that's going to go up back closer to the previous pre-COVID levels in 2022. Now, an X factor here, and I think it's good news. Joe, you asked about industry. You'll remember the Isle of Capri got totally destroyed in Hurricane Laura. Hadn't been open since. They were going to repair it, but they realized, look, we were going to build a new casino anyway. Going to be land-based, going to be bigger floor space, meaning more gaming space, more amenities. So they got approval from the state to say, can we not repair it, just start building our new one? And they have. But it is projected at the earliest to open in the fall of 2022. So we didn't budget any money in 2022 from the Isle of Capri, which is now owned by Caesars Entertainment. I believe they're going to call it the Horseshoe, unless I might be getting that confused. There's so much in gaming. Not really. I don't think we factored this in, but y'all know recently that sports betting is now at least 2 of the local facilities. There'll be at more. That will add some revenues. That's a big draw for these guys, but it doesn't affect our revenue forecast. But again, going in the right direction is what we project. Any questions on the gaming side? Let's switch to expenditure. So we get these monies in from different sources. Where does it go? About 5 main categories. I'll touch on them, see what questions you might have. So, Public Works, as you can see, this counts any operational and capital. This is by category. It's all in there. Public Works is still your bread and butter operation. It counts a lot of things. It makes up the biggest portion of your budget at 34%. The second one at the top is disaster recovery at 29.2%. I'll go over some of these categories in just a moment, but you can see in the green on the right at about 3 o'clock, general government expenditures, that's pretty much a standard staple. That doesn't change a whole lot. A couple of the other categories, sanitation, that's like trash collection, and then public safety is OEP and others. Small in the percentages, but important in the big picture. Let's take a few of these categories and break them down. Disaster recovery, which makes up $115 million of your budget, that's why it's about 30% of it, is in 2 primary areas. The first one at $40.4 million is the repair of your parish buildings and facilities. You oversee a lot of buildings, a lot. Some people don't realize how many. Most of them, almost all of them got damaged in Hurricane Laura, some major. And so we've got to repair all those. And we're still early in that. Give you an example, some of the early things we're about to finish are out, like at the jail, for example, which you own, sheriff runs it. We needed to fix that real quick, and it's close. We got to bring those prisoners back. We're paying a small fortune to keep them at other places, and that's on the parish tab. So that's a good thing. Well, there's still a lot of buildings. This is going to need repairs. 901, go all around. You know, juvenile justice is still in their old building. They're about to go to a new one, but no matter where you look, this is going to be a big expenditure. That's the first category. The bigger one is one I know y'all have been very interested in getting started, and that is the drainage lateral cleanout. That is the hurricane debris removal from drainage laterals, which is now started, as you know, I guess, Alan, 4 to 6 weeks ago, maybe-ish, 4. It's going to take a long time. They've got to do it in certain phases. The general process is get the big ones first, and then you move to the phases. They'll all get done, and we've had a really good early start. and we want to promote that. I make sure you're able to give some answers to the public who calls you. It's parish-wide. This is a tough guess. $74 million is it's hard to know. We think it'll go beyond 2022, but as you can see, that's what makes up the big cost, and so that comes to $115 million. Just recovery cost. Let's go to operations. The operations budget we're proposing would go up 12.2% compared to this year's budget. That's higher than normal. I think when you see what makes that up, you're going to feel like it's a very good investment into different areas of your operations, but I broke it down into 4 different things. First, personnel. Y'all know this. Many of you are in business for yourself, own businesses. Personnel and the benefits with it are always going to be one of your highest operational costs. In 2021, in this year's budget, because of the expectation of the revenue loss, we not only froze positions, we cut 19 or 20. Didn't lay off anybody, but we cut some positions that weren't filled that the departments needed to. With the restoration of revenues better than what we thought, we're not going haywire. We're just putting a lot of those back and a few more. I think it nets to 24 additional positions, but that's throughout the organization. Public Works, Juvenile Justice, Finance, and it is very needed to provide services y'all want to give the public. Included in that same thing is a 5% wage adjustment. It's no secret, some of this is due to inflation, which is high. We've got to keep up. We've got to be competitive. Frankly, this isn't enough, but we feel like we can do as much as we can that y'all can accept. That's made up of some inflationary adjustment as well as a merit increase in the system we have. So that's personnel. We're also going to start seeing higher costs for your solid waste services, mainly residential trash collection, to be determined. We know it's going to be higher. Good news is, in that budget is also improvements at the 2 solid waste centers on both sides of the river. Better efficiencies and capacities at both. Alan and his team are working on those designs as we speak. This third one's a really big one and an important one, and it's Public Works equipment purchases. And honestly, that's like 1.6 million. This consists of many things. You've got new tractors, mowers, excavators, grade all, tandem truck, towable message boards. These are things they've needed for a long time to either replace older equipment or we're finding the needs in certain things. And they've delayed it for good reasons, for the revenue expectations, but we really need to invest. Good news is you don't have to do that every year, so this is part of that 12%. The last one on here is very similar. We need a new airplane and mosquito control. We've got 2 right now. One of them is a lot newer and better, bigger. One of them is not. One is smaller, older. We need to replace that with one like we have already. For those of you interested, we're looking at purchasing a King Air is what it's called. And it will greatly increase our efficiency and capability in aerial spraying. So that whole purchase is in operations. You don't have to get a plane every year, but we will next year. That's about $1 million. So if you add all those up, that's where most of the 12% comes from. One other point on operations. If you take the equipment purchases in Public Works and the airplane for mosquito control, and just for the sake of knowing, take those out, your operational increase is down to 8.8%. So that's really affecting that amount, but we need them both badly, so we hope you're supportive of that. Y'all have expressed that you think it's good, so we were glad to hear that. Any questions on operations? I know I'm going through this kind of quick, but I don't want to miss anything. Okay. Let's look at capital now. I always like the capital budget because that's the visionary part of your core values. And so, to no one's surprise, the big green pie wedge, 56% of the capital budget is roads and bridges. You build them, you maintain them, you replace bridges, you overlay roads, You've got 1,100 plus miles of road in the unincorporated areas that you are responsible for. That is a lot of mileage. That means doesn't count cities, doesn't count state routes. You got to maintain the roads, the ditches on the side of the roads. It's an amazing, huge task. Your Public Works and Engineering Department does an excellent job, but it costs money. But we've got the money, and that's one. And I know when we met, with y'all in groups, Alan had the list. All the detail for that is in the package you've gotten, but certainly please follow up with him or John Bruce or his staff if you want more detail on that. The next biggest category at the bottom is blue, major facilities, 28 million. That is what we call the bond projects. Several new buildings, major repairs at Burton. I'm going to go over those slides in a minute, but these are the ones for the future that are going to set the standard for the next literal 20 to 30 years in providing services for some of your departments. And then stormwater is drainage projects. You've had a lot this year. You have more next year. That's separate from the drainage debris in the laterals. That's just recovery. This is good new drainage projects. Courthouse complex and jail, that's a lot of just stuff you've got to do to keep it up and then improve it for resiliency, and then some other categories. So let's cover a few of these categories, and I'm just going to hit some high points, but if you have questions, let me know. This slide hasn't changed much from last year, but that's because new roads take a long time to build. Coach Williams Drive, we're very close. I know that's something Randy Burley's been following closely. It's a pretty complex project, but we're well on our way. I don't have a percentage done, but we think in 2022 it gets very close, if not to completion, I think near it. And that, of course, is in the sort of Mossville area. Johnny Bro Road over in the Vinton area is well underway. That is going to be great for economic development for that area, especially the port down in Vinton. It'll open up a lot of ability for trucks to get down there much easier and out of there much easier. Ham Reed Road, south of Lake Charles, major east-west extension that will ultimately connect to Big Lake from Elliott. For those of you, and there's a lot of us, who come down, Elliott Road and go to Country Club and down to Big Lake, it's very winding and sharp, and this will be a good alternative route when it's done. This will be a major help to that whole area of the parish. John Bruce predicts that they can complete 9 bridge replacements next year. And then, of course, we've got a lot of drainage projects, which Alan would be happy to cover with you in detail. That's always going to be big in capital. So that's on the infrastructure, our road and drainage infrastructure side. Let me talk briefly about some of the big bond projects. The Calcasieu Forensic Center, got an image at the bottom right. That's more commonly referred to by people as the new coroner's office, but it's more than that. It will be state-of-the-art. Terry Welke, the coroner, had great input in this. We've got things in there. It needs to be modernized. Y'all know that. It will also include the crime lab, which the sheriff oversees, but it'll be a part of this building. And we think that, as well as the animal services facility, where there's an image at the top, again, badly needed. Both of those in the near future, we think we'll be able to come to y'all with advertisements. So I know we've been teasing this for a long time, and I'm not going to deny the hurricane set us back, but we're closer than we've ever been, and we're, knock on wood, we think we're going to be under construction on both of those in 2022, hopefully first half of the year. Burton mainly is HVAC total replacement. That's the first thing. We've had good discussions with y'all. We know some of the things at Burton which we need to do. It's just a matter of what do we get to first. That's the main one in 2022, but there's plenty of other improvements at Burton. That's just some of the big ones, a whole lot more on the smaller scale. Before I'm getting toward the end on any of the numbers, if you will, I just want to pause and if you have any questions on the capital or any of that. Okay.
Anybody any questions?
All right, I always like ending with sort of just stopping and saying, what are we looking, what do we see as we look ahead? And the budget, of course, it's more than numbers. It represents what your priorities are in delivering services to the public. Yes, you got to put the revenues and the expenditures together, and they got to match, but what is it you're saying that they want and need? And that changes every year. What's really made this harder is the hurricanes over the last year and a half. And so we try to see beyond the recovery, which we're not out of yet. And I like this slide because what I want to convey is an image where most of what you see is blurry because we're still deep in the recovery. But if you look close, and yes, it's glass half full, but it's not made up, you'll see in the middle of that lens a clear focus. It's coming into focus. The good things are starting to pop up more. If you look really close, what you see in the focus part is light. It's the sunrise, it's light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not false. There's a lot of good things happening. I don't think we hear enough of it because it's so covered by the things we're still challenged about.
I'm just hoping it's not an asteroid.
I know.
That's the only thing that
That's the
hasn't
only
happened.
thing left. I'll be honest, I know I've taken tornadoes. We don't get a lot of them here, so when that one hit recently, I thought, man, what is left? And I forgot about the meteor or asteroid. But the future is starting to come into focus. Challenges remain, and look, I know this is a theme of light at the end of the tunnel, but it's important. We know housing is still short in supply, and a lot of people aren't moved in. They're struggling with insurance companies. The cost is up on gas, groceries, the whole bit. A lot of our favorite businesses maybe won't ever reopen, but many are, okay? Population loss. Our census number is up a lot in Calcasieu, but that was done before the hurricanes. I don't know that it's horrible, but we do know we've lost people due to the shortage of housing. So we're not ignoring that. We continue to fight through it, but that's not the whole story. We are moving in the right direction, and I want to give some examples, some concrete examples. As I showed you in the graph earlier, we have more job creation in commerce and industry than we've seen in a long time, meaning pre-COVID. Tax revenues are remaining stable. They might even grow better than we think. Gaming industry is rebounding. The economic forecast is positive. Not from us. We don't come up with this. This is outside people who study this, who do this for a living. They're bullish on our area. They think this is going to come back, and they recognize how hard we've been hit. And I know y'all hear this too, but I can tell you there is a very clear, in my opinion, deep respect for our area and looking at how have y'all gotten through this. They understand this doesn't happen to most places. So the rebound has a lot to do, I think, with this area's character and resilience. And not to be diminished, I've mentioned it earlier, the federal funding is going to have a big impact here once the money flows. Community Development Block Grant, hazard mitigation, which will help us elevate homes, strengthen structures, improve drainage. And then last thing is the American Rescue Plan funds. That's not hurricane related, it's technically COVID related. Y'all have already approved that plan in concept and in structure, and it's got drainage improvements, waterworks improvements, sewer improvements, a lot of good stuff. So the news, in my opinion, is very good, and we feel good about where we're headed. And so my last slide before we give you a timeline, I want to also emphasize, in addition to just looking at our current issues and demands and looking at 2022, we simultaneously are looking ahead further. We keep saying the word vision, and that's why it's so big on this slide. You earlier this year, very recently, approved a very solid long-term hurricane recovery plan. We're already shifting from building the plan to getting the people and things in place to implement this plan over the next few years. It's aggressive. It's going to take some new funds. It's going to take different thinking. But we are looking ahead because that's what you're tasked to do if you have a value of vision. And more specifically to the police jury, your strategic plan, which it's time to update it. A lot of work's already been done. Public input, employee input. We had a department leader retreat just a couple of Fridays ago. We will probably ask the jury to have its retreat to start pulling that together in early January. So we'll catch y'all up on that very soon, and that's going to be for the next 3 years. It's going to set your broad priorities, and we'll follow that with goals underneath. So we're looking at today's issues, but we're also keeping an eye on the future, and that's what y'all ask us to do as a staff. Following your lead. This is the last slide, and it's just a timeline. Tonight is the presentation of the proposed budget. It goes public, as I mentioned, tonight, between now and the December 16th, so plenty of time for input. By state law, we've got to have a public hearing about midway through, so December 2nd. This committee, Mr. Barty will chair it, probably before that regular meeting. And then on December 16th, hopefully if everything goes well, that would be y'all's formal adoption of a budget for 2022. So, let me, if there's any, is there a noise? Okay. I don't know what that is, but it threw me off. So, did you say the asteroid? Dang, Chris. So, anyway, is there anything I left out, Tammy? I don't want to let the finance director not have a shot if it's important. So, we good?
I think we're good. We have it on the website tonight as well.
Okay, thank you. Probably by tomorrow morning, Tom and his staff will put the presentation, which kind of help people give an overview, but for tonight, people will get it. So, if there are any questions, fine. If not, that concludes, Mr. Chairman, our presentation, and I think that's all we have on the agenda tonight.
You referenced looking ahead. Any insight yet on the infrastructure bill, if we'll get any money for a new bridge on I-10? I said insight. I'm looking.
Can you start smaller? No. I don't know. Look, since you asked, I think yes. I'll tell you this, without getting into detail, we are plugged into that process. You want to know that, you need to know that, and so obviously, I'm just going to limit this to Louisiana. Yes, there's going to be certain money that comes to the state, and that's got to be divvied. It may be more of that and working with the state as opposed to feds, because it's kind of how the system's set up. But we are, especially because of that and all these other federal funds, we've gotten outside help, and we will be pulling y'all in, but we are not going to be left out of those discussions, I can assure you. And if ever this bridge had a shot to be replaced, this is it. And I really think we can't. Now, is it going to take some state match? Yes. As a reminder, the governor has committed, I think, $85 million, which, you know, it's not huge, but it's something. Questions about whether or not there would be a toll, don't know. I think it's still possible. I will say I don't think this bill would be enough to pay for the whole bridge by itself, but man, it could put a big dent in it and make it. I think we go from maybe not likely at all to very possible, in my opinion, to try to answer your question.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Thank you,
Any other
Anthony.
questions? It's a very comprehensive.
Yeah, it gets thicker. I hate that, but you know.
You know, I think the major takeaway I have is the word that you mentioned. Where we headed for what we've been through. So with that,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
do you have any other matters to consider?
Move to adjourn.